Hello, warm welcome to Fireside Chats. This is a show in which we look at the core of spirituality. We ask you, the individual, to assess what impact spirituality has on your consciousness. We look at your relationship with God, whether you have one and how balanced it is, whether God is just a name or a concept to you, or do you have a real relationship with God. We ask you to look into your heart and your mind and to ask yourself the crucial question is your life what you want it to be? Is there any room for improvement? Is there any sorrow in your heart? Are there any things that are going on inside of you that you cannot discuss with anyone? To this end, we hope that this series will be of some benefit to you, where you can help yourself using the tools of spirituality. I have in the studio with me today Sister Denise, who has been practicing Rajyoga Meditation for over 4 decades, and she brings to bear a wealth of experience, power, and wisdom to the studio, and she's kind enough to share all of that with us. Sister Denise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Very warm welcome to today's show.
Thanks.
Dealing with inner conflict. How does one go about doing this when you are armed with spiritual tools? Are you equipped with arms and tools that the rest of us do not have?
Probably, yes.
Oh, really? Okay. So today you will share, because inner conflict is an unnamed burden that a lot of people carry.
I think it's because it's not clear in people's minds what's actually going on the inside. So in spiritual practice, we learn about who is in charge of the inner world. And that is really the soul-conscious soul, the one who is, taking power, assuming power, and then you have what we also call as your ministers. So it's like a government inside. And the king is the self, the soul, who is endowed with spiritual wisdom. And one of your ministers is your mind. Now, inner conflict is where you have thoughts, feelings, conscience, this, that, the other, all these different bits are vying for the position of sovereignty within the consciousness. And the self-empowered self, which is really the intellect, sits in the position of power. Now, if that is usurped, it can only be usurped if the self steps down. So the problem that is there in most people is that the intellect or the conscience is weak. And the reason is because people have done a great deal of action against their own conscience. And this is what causes it to get usurped by the emotions, which can be much more powerful as the leaders in this inner government than the conscience. So people then are ruled by their feelings instead of by their wisdom. And so the person...
Yes, people are ruled by their feelings instead of wisdom.
Yes.
That's very powerful. We'll come back to that. Go on.
Because your intellect is weak, your conscience has been rendered useless, because every time you do an action against your conscience, it loses functionality, so it cannot hold its position as the leader of the consciousness.
Okay, Sister Denise, that is a bomb of a sentence. Okay. Okay, we'll come back to the other one later. Every time you do something against explain that, please. What you just said, explain it.
Ask people, do you always follow the voice of conscience? I do this quite often in my lectures and so on. And I have never found anyone who says, I always follow the voice of conscience. Usually people say, well, I sometimes follow the voice of conscience, but very often, several times a day, I go against the voice of conscience. Why? Because of fear, because it costs you too much, because you don't have the courage, because you're confused, because you're under someone else's influence. There are all kinds of excuses given for going against the voice of conscience. And people do not realize that every time you do that, it loses functionality, so that instead of being your greatest friend, your most reliable guide, it's, rendered useless. It can't operate. So you have to begin to give it its due place, you see, and you have to really identify with it. Going against my conscience is going against me, and going against me is self-destructive. Going against me means I choose to be somebody else's slave, you see. And so it's so much against your own dignity. And part of it is because the spirit is so impoverished. So once you start meditating, you start thinking, you start studying, then you begin to have to reinstate the real self, the true self, the empowered intellect, the functionalized conscience. And then the emotions who seek to rule, they have to follow the instruction of wisdom. And, anybody who tries to make a decision when they're in an emotional state, they're unlikely to make a wise decision. They will do something quite reckless, which later they will regret.
So Denise, the expression, follow your gut feeling, is quite a common one. Follow your gut feeling and follow your intuition. You earlier said that it's most people are ruled by their feelings and not their wisdom. Why is it dangerous to do that? And how does the one clash with the other?
It's not like that. Your gut feeling is not the same as your feelings.
What is your gut feeling?
Your gut feeling is much closer to your conscience than your feelings. You see, because there you're going to a deeper place, an intuitive place, which is not your feelings as your aroused emotions. Do you see the distinction?
Okay, so your gut feeling is comes neither from your gut nor is it a feeling. It's yeah, okay, that's extremely funny. So your feelings should not overtake your own innate wisdom.
But you know what happens? People are very fuzzy, very imprecise in the use of language. And so you will use the word feeling to refer to something in one case and something totally different in another case. And so then the word feeling loses precision of meaning. So if you are precise in your language and really articulate about saying exactly what you mean, then you're going to have to think, what do I mean here? What's going on here? Am I operating from my intuition? You say gut feeling. It's common to use that word, gut feeling. Some people, they operate from their gut. What does that mean? That in their consciousness, something is happening and there is an effect in your stomach. Others, something is happening in their consciousness and there is an effect in their heart. And so they will say, well, my heart says. Somebody else will say, well, my gut says. They do not know that actually it's in their consciousness that all of this is happening, and there's a secondary effect on their body. And because of being disconnected or unaware of the workings of consciousness, they talk about the consciousness as if it is the secondary effect. So unless you study these things, you wouldn't even know. So you use a vocabulary that corresponds to your perception. And the more you are materialistic, the more you operate on the basis of sense perception, the more you will describe it in those terms, but it's very imprecise. And what it results in is a lot of imprecision about how clear you are about what's happening in your own consciousness. So this is why in spiritual study we have a vocabulary that applies to the different aspects of consciousness. And in the English language, there are less words for the different attributes of consciousness than in the Hindi language or Sanskrit language, for example. Just like in medicine, most of the names of the body parts are in Latin, because we don't have English words for them, so we just use the Latin words. In the same way, those languages where consciousness has been deeply thought about and studied, they have words for it which don't necessarily exist in other languages. Just a word in English, the word the mind, it doesn't exist in all other European languages. You see, in French, you say l'esprit, which you might say, well, that's the spirit. La pensée, well, that's your thinking. So, you know, when you translate words from one language to another, it's always an interpretation. It's equivalent, but never exactly the same, because the language corresponds to the culture, which corresponds to the way the majority of people think in that region. And here, where we're talking about these very fine-tuned attributes of consciousness, referring to a body of spiritual knowledge, which is originally given in the Hindi language or the Sanskrit language, you know, you're moving through cultures and languages to arrive at this question. Now, what do I exactly mean by what I say? You know? Okay.
So Denise, when I think of inner conflict, my mind goes to the many people who hate themselves. My mind goes to people who have what is now commonly known as the inner critic. I think of people who have experienced extreme trauma in their childhood. I think of people who have got no idea who and what they are, who are adults but living in a highly confused state. I think of people who have yet to understand their own sexual identity. You have a whole variety of people who have various reasons for inner conflict. How do you begin to assume control in an absolute state of inner mayhem and anarchy? How does, I understand what you said about the soul being the king. It sounds lovely in words. How do you put that into practice so that an individual can actually go to bed after years and years and years and think, today I felt good inside? There's so many people who don't know what it means at all to feel good inside.
Well, it's as if you've got a failed state inside.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a failed state. What are you going to do to make it work? You have to begin by introducing something functional. So the first thing to introduce is you are a pure soul. Just that statement. You see, because the person thinks, I am a wretched body. And then you counteract that with, actually that's not true. You're a pure soul. So consider that. You know, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Get a person to take into consideration something that they just hadn't considered before. And especially if you are a good yogi and you can actually transmit what it feels like to be a pure soul, so that that person can feel it even for only a few seconds or a minute. It's an unforgettable feeling, and it's an undeniable feeling. And then what you need to do is remind that person, you felt it, didn't you? Was it real? Yes, it was real. Okay, just go there, because that is your saving grace. If you can go there again and again and again. And every time you go there, you're reinforcing the validity and the position within the consciousness of that real experience. And that is giving you, as it were, ammunition to counteract the bullets of negativity that keep coming from the deluded mind. So this is where you start.
Okay.
So you need to meditate on those things, and you need to continuously have exposure to those ideas. So in effect, it is an education where you're learning how to go from a failed state inside to order, harmony, and functionality. So each and every little bit that you do is adding to the harmonizing and subtracting from the chaos. And so you have to give it importance and work on it, and you will get there.
So Denise, how does one know whether, or rather at what stage one needs to look at the possibility of taking professional help? Because help is available out there, and I mean from the medical profession.
One of the problems that seems to be happening at the moment, which is just a phenomenon, and that is that the amount of time and energy required by the mental health profession to make a serious improvement in the condition of people with mental health problems is so big that they're finding it very difficult to actually do it, because the quantity of people is enormous. And so expediency has meant that, okay, psychotropic drugs are prescribed and some therapy is given, but it's actually less than it was 20, 30 years ago. So that is an unfortunate situation. And because of that, I think, what's known as the self-help groups are actually more powerful, because it's the people themselves who experience and who come to recognize their particular problem, come together with other people of a similar situation and work the programs, the 12-step programs, that are actually able to, make more impact. And interestingly, the foundation of those programs is spiritual. Trying to introduce into the current vocabulary, into the mainstream, ideas like, people are spiritual beings operating through physical bodies. Just to get that message into the mainstream is going to carry people forward a lot. And then the other idea that, it's a game going on, and you need to learn some skills at playing this game. You don't have to be a victim. Here are some things that you can work with, and it's beginning to happen. Because there are so many people who are realizing that the problem is really a spiritual problem, and they're going to all kinds of sources. So more and more of this is getting into the mainstream, which is good.
Sister Denise, how does one bring God into this equation? inner conflict, can God come into such a space where there's chaos? Or do you have to resolve your inner issues first before inviting God into that, into the arena of your mind?
If you want to bring God into anything, you have to detach yourself from the chaos, and you yourself go to God. And then empower yourself by working with God, bring God, and then, take that help to bring order into that chaos. God is famous for bringing order into chaos, after all.
And what impact does His presence have in somebody who has, whose reality is one of internal conflict?
Calm, you see. And I think that, when a person has the experience of calm, they let go of all of that conflicting stuff. And when you let go of it, it kind of dies down, because you're the one who's making it jump up and down anyway in the first place.
Okay. Okay, so Sister Denise, the transition from inner conflict to a state where there isn't any, what is the ideal internal state for a human being? Is zero conflict the aim?
No,
is zero problems the aim?
No, it's not like that. You begin to study these things, you begin to empower yourself, but at any time, some kind of, conflict can rear its ugly face and attack you. And you have to have your spiritual weapons with you to calm down that thing which is going to come up. And it's going to come up continuously, and you are going to get more skilled at dealing with it more quickly and more effectively and for a longer period of time. But, the thing is there in your sanskaras. It means deep in your subconscious, and it will come and attack you if you get a little tired, or if you haven't been meditating and you kind of get a little less powerful, it will take advantage, So this is why there's always this analogy of the spiritual warrior who is dealing with the negativity, the enemy within. And so the spiritual warrior doesn't have anything against any other human beings, because all human beings are fundamentally pure souls who may or may not be aware of that. But the thing that is opposing you is the force of negativity, which is made of your negative emotions that fill the empty space left by your depleting fundamental energies.
Okay, so you want to share anything before we say goodbye to you? Because unfortunately, with the end of today's episode,
I think the most important thing is to be willing to continue to refine yourself, and to be willing to continue to take out negativity as and when it comes, and to persevere. And not to think that, okay, I just do it one time and then it's gone. Not like that. It will keep coming, and you become more skilled, and a time will come when it's totally quiet. But I don't think you need to judge your success by, is there no more negativity coming up? Your success is, how quickly and effectively do I deal with it as and when it comes up?
Okay, that's very powerful. No,
it's your
thank you.
Inner law enforcement agency.
Okay, so it's not the chaos that has to come into order, it's the way you handle it. That's the yardstick of success.
I would say.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for your insight and your depth. I'm sure the viewer has taken as much benefit from this talk as I have. So there you go, brothers and sisters, the subject of internal conflict. It's something that we are all plagued with. With some people, it's very intense, causing chaos in their personal lives and their inner world. With others, it's a mild form. And what Sister Denise has shared today is fear not, help is at hand, and simply applies some very basic but real spiritual principles by understanding the way your inner world works and assuming control where you yourself have lost it. That is the answer. And so if you are plagued by any form of internal ugliness, this can be changed through some effort on your part. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Sister Denise, and we hope to see you at home soon. Thank you and goodbye.